On November 18, 1884, Martha Hale began surrounding her cabin with dead sunflower stalks. Working against the cold, she planted their cut ends on flat stones, bound the stems into narrow bundles, and stood them shoulder-high along the north and west walls. Between each bundle and the cottonwood logs, she left a gap as wide as 2 fingers. The strange work stopped travelers on the Wind River Trail. Caleb Rusk reined in his bay gelding and watched Martha tighten a rawhide lashing, with hands reddened by cold. Martha has built herself a summer garden for a Wyoming winter. 2 ranch hands beside him laughed. From the cabin step, 11-year-old Thomas Hale heard them. Moss, a small black and white cattle dog with one torn left ear, stood pressed against the boy's leg. Martha never looked up. Above the western ridge, the sky had turned the color of iron. Winter was already coming. 3 years earlier, cold had taken Samuel Hale before dawn. A northwest gale had driven through the clay and moss chinking of their first cabin, until the cast-iron stove could no longer keep the room above freezing. Samuel had gone outside with a hand axe to split more cottonwood from the stack behind the shed. Searchers found him the next morning, half a mile away. Since then, Martha had counted every stick of fuel before winter and studied each place where the wind entered. Whenever the weather turned, she kept Thomas close. Thin for his age, the boy was old enough to remember his uncle's empty chair. He carried the sunflower bundles while Moss followed between them, the dog's torn ear twitching at every gust. Their new cabin stood alone on open ground, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. It had 1 room, 1 door, and 1 iron box stove. Nothing extra. By sundown, the temperature had fallen to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Thomas glanced toward the darkening ridge. Will it hold? Pulling another rawhide strip tight, Martha answered, It must. By the 3rd day, the stalks covered the entire north wall and half of the west. Before raising them, Martha stripped away every seed head. Thomas shook each bundle over bare ground, while Moss nosed through the fallen husks. Any stalk that felt damp or soft went into a separate pile for later burning. The sound ones rested on field stones, so their ends never touched the soil. Next came the spacing. Martha kept a 2-finger air gap between the dry stalks and the cottonwood logs. Beside the stovepipe wall, she cleared a strip 6 feet wide and exposed the earth. No bundle came near it. Still, people found reasons to stop. Edwin Pike arrived with a sack of flour across his saddle. Pressing 1 stalk between his fingers, he shook his head. Dead flowers will not hold back January. Nora Bell came the following afternoon. She examined the raised ends and the missing seed heads, but doubt remained in her face. She will have mice at the walls before she has warmth inside them. Neither warning drew an answer. Using a brace and auger bit, Martha bored holes through short wooden stakes and drove them into the ground with a mallet. Rawhide lashings held the bundles against the stakes without forcing them against the cabin. On Saturday, Caleb returned with 2 ranch hands. He studied the yellow-gray barrier and gave it a name. The Flower Fort. The name traveled faster than the work. By Sunday, children repeated it outside Pike's store. Men used it when Martha passed with Thomas. Even Nora smiled once when she heard it. 1 wall at a time, Martha kept building. 20 years earlier, along the Platte River, she had first seen the method at her grandfather's low cabin beside an open stretch of prairie. He grew sunflowers for seed and lamp oil. After harvest, he tied the dried stalks along the windward wall, leaving a narrow space behind them. Snow gathered against the outer bundles while the logs beneath stayed dry. With 1 bent finger, her grandfather had shown her the gap. The wall does not need more fire if the wind cannot steal what the fire has made. That was the only explanation he ever gave. After Samuel's death, Martha searched her memory for every detail. Stripped seed heads, raised ends, open air behind the stalks, and bare earth near the stovepipe. She did not claim the barrier could stop winter. It only had to slow the wind. Together, Martha and Thomas sorted the final wagon load. They rejected every stalk marked by mold, softness, or insect holes. Nearby, Moss watched loose leaves tumble eastward across the hard ground. By then, the flower fort had reached the southwest corner, and the north wind could no longer strike the logs directly. The first setback came from below. Sleet softened the soil beneath the west wall. By morning, 3 bundles leaned outward, and one lashing had slipped low enough for the stalks to brush the logs. Martha removed the affected sections at once. With an iron spade, she cut shallow channels to carry meltwater away from the cabin. Thomas brought wider stones from the creek bed. Each bundle was reset with its lower end raised 2 inches above the earth, and the stakes went deeper before the rawhide was tightened again. 2 days later, Thomas discovered mouse droppings beneath a bundle near the south corner. Norabel's warning had not been foolish. Every section came open. They shook out the stalks, discarded 3 bundles that still held bits of seed, and scraped the ground bare. Thomas checked each hollow stem while Moss worked beside him, nose moving quickly through the dry leaves. No nest remained. The third setback arrived on the wind. Before dawn, a hard gust tore loose nearly 20 feet of stalks and scattered them across the yard. Caleb saw the damage from the trail and slowed his horse, but Martha was already rebuilding. This time, the auger made paired holes in every stake. Rawhide passed through both openings, crossed around each bundle, and secured the stalks at 2 heights instead of 1. When the work was finished, Martha leaned her full weight against the wall. It held. By week's end, the north and west sides stood complete. The cabin logs remained untouched behind them, the ground stayed open beneath them, and 6 feet of bare earth surrounded the stovepipe wall. 3 failures had tested the method. 3 changes had strengthened it. Without haste. Dr. Elias Ward arrived on November 29th with a mercury thermometer wrapped in wool inside his coat. Once an Army surgeon, he had settled near the Basin, and men who ignored one another's advice still listened when he spoke. That morning, however, he asked no questions. His inspection began at the north wall. 2 fingers measured the space between stalks and logs. He pressed the lower ends to confirm they rested on stone rather than soil, examined the crossed lashings at the west corner, and paced the 6 feet of bare earth beside the stovepipe. Finally, he crouched over the drainage channels. Martha waited beside Thomas while Caleb watched from his saddle farther down the trail. After brushing dirt from one knee, Dr. Ward looked at Martha and gave a slow nod. Nothing more. That afternoon, cattle moved down from the northern flats before anyone drove them. Ravens crossed the basin in a low, black line. In the yard, Moss raised his nose westward, his torn ear flattened by a wind that had not yet reached the cabin. At sunset, the thermometer read 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Then the sky went still. Too still. The storm struck before midnight on December 2nd. Wind roared down from the northwest, driving snow so hard that Thomas could not see the woodpile from the doorway. By dawn, 21 inches covered the ground, and the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees below zero. Martha kept the stove at an even burn. Each split length of cottonwood was counted before it went inside and marked on a wooden fuel tally. Thomas added no extra wood. The blankets remained folded until night. Outside, snow packed against the sunflower barrier, but the stalks did not bend into the logs. Air remained beneath the raised ends, and the drainage channels stayed open along the western wall. 3 miles east, Caleb Rusk faced the same storm. His cabin was nearly the same size as Martha's, built of cottonwood logs with clay and moss chinking, and heated by a similar iron stove. Both families had cut fuel from the same creekside stand. Nothing interrupted the wind at Caleb's north wall. During the first 18 hours of the storm, his family burned 46 pieces of split cottonwood. Frost formed along the inside corners. His wife pressed wool cloth into the worst gaps, yet the room fell to 34 degrees Fahrenheit whenever the stove door opened. Over the same 18 hours, Martha's stove used 28 pieces, Near dusk, Dr. Ward reached her cabin by following the fence line through waist-deep drifts. Snow crusted his coat and beard. He placed the mercury thermometer on the table and waited 10 minutes. Outside, the reading stood at 16 degrees below zero. Inside, it held at 52. No one spoke. A pounding suddenly shook the door. Caleb stood outside with his wife and youngest boy. Their fuel sled had overturned somewhere in the white darkness behind them. Without comment, Martha brought them in. Caleb's wife and son took the 2 chairs. He remained near the door while moss settled beneath the table. 7 people now shared the single room and the same stove. Martha did not increase the fire. Dr. Ward watched the thermometer. With the added bodies and only one opening of the door, the room rose from 52 to 55 degrees. During the next 6 hours, 9 more pieces of cottonwood went into the stove. From inside, Caleb examined the north wall. No frost marked the corners. The chinking matched his own. The stove was no larger, and the blankets still lay folded. Only the sunflower barrier was different. At first light, the wind eased enough for Dr. Ward to inspect the exterior. Snow stood 3 feet deep against the stalks. Behind them, the logs remained dry, and the 2-finger gap had not closed. After 36 hours, Martha's final tally showed 41 pieces of cottonwood burned. Caleb had used 46 pieces during the storm's first 18 hours alone, yet his cabin had fallen to 34 degrees. Martha rubbed one mark from the tally with her thumb. No triumph, only proof. By noon, the storm weakened enough for Caleb to return home. Before leaving, he placed one hand against the sunflower wall. Snow slid from the stalks and fell around his boots. "You were right," he told Martha. That was all. The following week, Caleb hauled 2 wagon loads of dry stalks from an abandoned field near the river. He removed the seed heads, lifted the bundles onto flat stones, and left the same narrow air gap along his north wall. Nora helped him check for damp stems and mouse nests. Behind the store, Edwin Pike began saving rawhide strips for families who wanted barriers of their own. No one called it the flower fort after that. By January, 6 cabins along the trail wore sunflower stalks on their windward walls. Each family kept bare earth around the stovepipe side, lifted the bundles above the soil, and left room for the logs to breathe. Martha gave no speeches. She simply showed them the spacing. 2 fingers. Years passed, and the basin changed. Cabins multiplied along the trail. Roads replaced wagon ruts. Families planted sunflowers beside their fences, though many eventually forgot why the stalks were saved after harvest. Some called them wind walls. Others called them winter screens. Martha lived long enough to watch Thomas build a cabin of his own. Every autumn, he raised dry sunflower bundles along the north and west walls, 2 inches above the earth and 2 fingers from the logs. In time, he taught his children the same measurements. Caleb Rusk's mocking name faded from memory. So did the blizzard of 1884. Yet whenever the first hard wind crossed the Wind River Basin, the old cabins still wore their walls of faded stalks. Inside, the fires lasted longer.